Okay, good afternoon, students. We now come to the next lecture on publication ethics. My last lecture, I had dealt with uh, publication ethics, the guidelines concerning publication ethics. Then I showed you about this committee on publication ethics scope, which has spelled out certain advisory guidelines on how to deal with publication misconducts and problems arising from publications. When manuscripts are sent for publication in a journal, so what are the problems that one can face? And among these, I had also discussed about conflict of interest, a very interesting topic. And I also showed you how, in various ways, this conflict of interest can manifest itself when researchers or scientists write up the results and send them for publication. So let me just go through a brief recap of the earlier lecture. And in the meanwhile, if anyone has any questions regarding my earlier lecture, I'll give you 10 seconds. So please unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, there don't seem to be any questions. So we go ahead and yeah. So last time I had talked about this conflict of interest, and I couldn't finish that last part, which I will now try to do. So as I said earlier, a conflict of interest is a situation where a person or an organization is involved with multiple interests, and these interests could be scientific as well as financial. And the problem is that these are interests which clash with each other, and they possibly corrupt the motivation of the individual or even the organization sometimes. And so this competing interest, which I talked about, could be anything that can interfere with or could be reasonably perceived as interfering with the full and objective presentation, the peer review, editorial decision making, or publication of the research article or even non-research article submitted to a journal. And as I said, these interests could both be financial as well as non-financial. And again, they could be stemming from personal reasons or they could stem from professional reasons. And so they can arise from relationships in an organization or with other people. So these were the broad definitions of conflict of interest. So I showed you certain flow charts, a couple of flow charts where you deal with the conflict of interest at the time of submission of the manuscript itself. So this conflict of interest could have been noticed by the editor of the journal, or they could have been also noticed by the referees to which the manuscript is sent. So usually the referees may notice this conflict of interest. The issue is like that. As I said, all journals, when someone wants to submit paper, they ask for a conflict of interest declaration. So the author is supposed to give a declaration about possible conflicts of interest or the lack of. those conflict of interest. So now, in spite of that declaration, if the referee or the editor notices that there could be something extra, or there could be something which is more than what meets the eye, then there could be a check or an inquiry on this issue. So the first one was a reviewer, for example, can detect this conflict of interest, or he suspects a conflict of interest. So he will inform the editor of the journal, who again will in turn contact the author with this new information. And then again, the author may accept that, look, there could be something extra which is he has not declared or forgotten to declare, or probably didn't even know about it, or something like that, and then provide the extra information which is required from him. And then again, it will proceed with the review process. Or the other possibility is that the author actually denies that he has any conflict of interest, in spite of some suspicion which is being informed on that manuscript. So he may still deny. But then in that case, of course, the editor can only ask for a written declaration of conflict of interest and then proceed with the review process. So that is the normal flow chart which concerns a conflict of interest which has been detected before the publication of the or acceptance of the manuscript. Then there was another case where the conflict of interest goes undetected at the stage of review or editorial processes, and then it gets published. And then after it gets published, probably some reader who may notice, who may know about the authors, and then he may have some more information about the authors. And he may notice that a particular author or some authors have not declared a certain conflict of interest, and he may in turn contact the editor of the journal and inform him that, look, so and so author on this paper, or so and so authors in that paper may be having certain conflict of interest, and he may give some extra information to the editor. So the editor again goes through the same process. He will write to the authors and confronting them with this new evidence or whatever you can call it. And then again, it goes through the process where the authors either accept it or they don't accept it. And even when the authors accept it, there's a situation where the conflict of interest may drastically affect the published article, or the conflict of interest may not drastically affect the published article. So if it affects the published article drastically, then some special action may have to be taken by the editor, and this could also involve a retraction of the article from the journal. And in the other case, of course, just a new publishing of a new conflict of interest statement may just suffice. So it goes through certain processes like this, and which I have shown in this flow chart. And yeah, so this is the flow chart which concerns that. So this is the flow chart which concerns that conflict of interest which has been declared after the publication of the paper. Okay, so now I can, so especially with this second case where the conflict of interest is detected after publication, so that means it is what is called an undeclared conflict of interest. Okay, and so this is because this comes to light after the publication, and sometimes, the editors, they may not be willing to accept that such a thing has occurred. And so in such a situation, what should the journal do and how it should tackle the situation? So this I'll try to show you in form of certain case histories. So I think this I had already talked about. It was a study which reviewed the use of certain medical devices which perform a certain clinical maneuver. And it was noticed that one of the authors was actually working for a consultancy, but then he declared that he had no conflict of interest. But then some reader wrote to the journal saying that, look, this particular consultancy actually deals with these medical devices and also issues certain recommendations about these devices. So since the author has been working for that consultancy, so there is a conflict of interest here because he is writing about devices which is his firm is recommending to the government or whatever. So then, of course, the editors felt that there was a genuine case, and they asked the author whether he agreed with this. And also, the general advice from a journal is that if there is any doubt, authors should simply declare, that this is my interest and this is where I have been working, etc., etc., etc. Once he does that, then it's all fine. But this particular case, of course, the author explained that he had actually moved jobs, and after carrying out that research and writing the paper. But before the peer review process had occurred and the publication process had happened. And of course, the author gives his present address, which is different from that consultancy. So then the journal editor was wondering whether we should publish a notice showing undeclared conflict of interest. Okay. And anything else should be done or not. So this was put up to the Pope. And then the Pope said that, okay, yes, many authors are unclear as to what actually constitutes a conflict of interest. And then for some balance has to be struck between exactly what should be and or what could be declared. And of course, they said that the journal need not take any further action other than what was suggested by the editor. And also, editors should consider publishing in the editorial of the journal, that in the beginning of the journal itself, all guidelines about its conflict of interest so that it can help the authors deciding their conflict of interest statements. So now we come to the second case history where this was a paper on a very controversial topic from three authors and it was published. And all the three authors, they filled up the conflict of the interest form saying that they did not have any competing interests. And usually this statement is put at the end of all published articles now in the current situation. Then what happened was some reader subsequently contacted the journal editor to say that there was some clear evidence that one of the authors did have some competing interests. Then she said that this particular author had been actually involved in legal cases, and he also receives a good amount of financial consideration for his work. And this article, which has been published, actually relates to these legal cases. And so now the editor felt that, look, there is something here. So he intends to write to the person who complained and ask her permission whether this letter could be sent to the author. And if the author accepts that he does, of course, he did have a competing interest, then, of course, the journal has to publish a statement saying that, yes, this particular author did have a competing interest. And of course, this was put up to the Pope and asking them whether this is okay or something more has to be done. Because you see, the public has a right to know whether there are conflicting interests, and then if there's any doubt, it's better to disclose. And so the editor actually sent the complainant's letter to the author in question, and after which a statement of competing interest was issued by that author, a new conflict of interest statement, which was published along with the article. Then we come to another case where the author wrote to the editors Okay, it was a letter, publication letter. You see, articles or papers in journal have different formats. Some are called regular articles, some are called letters. Letters are those articles which describe the result very briefly in a short manner, and it is considered it is imperative to publish that short result immediately because of its importance. So that's called a letter. So one author sent a letter for publication on the subject of some drug which he was working on, and he showed the importance of doing research on that particular drug, which was well established already. And also, of course, he did not declare any conflict of interest, and he said that he had no competing interests. But then the journal came to know that he was actually conducting a trial of the same drug, which has been funded by a private pharmaceutical company. So then, of course, the journal approached the author and then asked him that he should declare this competing interest. And they also asked Cope what should be the correct course of action. But here what happened was the author did not think that he had a competing interest. So it was a perception of author that he was not in the wrong. And but then of course it was agreed by the journal and Cope that it is beneficial to publish statements of competing interest. And otherwise, the authors might think that, okay, it could be just an optional requirement. I don't have to send this conflict of interest statement. So in this particular case, there was a statement of declaration or conflict of interest declaration, which was subsequently published, and it was also written that, look, this has been omitted because people were not aware. And again, as I said, time and again, editors of journals must keep on publishing or issuing articles on this topic of competing interests, and they should highlight the journal policies on this issue of competing interests in those articles. Okay, then finally we come to another case history and undeclared conflict of interest. This was in the journal Nature, which is one of the top journals in all sciences. So there was a paper which the journal Nature actually corrected, and this was on fish farming, and this had to be corrected because some journalist who read that article, he pointed out that that one of the authors, the first author in fact, had some undisclosed ties with a business house, an agricultural business house, which is called Cargill. Cargill happens to be a very big agricultural business house. It's there in India also now. And so this journalist said that, look, this particular author had some ties with this company, Cargill. And then he also noted that several of the other authors also appeared to have some undeclared conflict of interest, but the journal did not bother to publish anything in this regard. Then what happened was a few weeks later, Nature updated its original correction to the article. This was an article called a 20-year retrospective review of global aquaculture. And in this article, it was found that the practice of fish farming has become significantly more friendly to the environment than it was 2 decades ago. Now, you see, when you talk about environment and then becoming friendly to the environment and all those things, they usually go against the principles of business houses. And business houses just simply usually do not care about environmental and climatic issues. So, in spite of initial hesitation, finally the journal Nature had to publish a very, very big correction to the paper. And you can see that now the present correction is a 600-word statement. So this has been published in Retraction Watch. I encourage all of you to visit this website of Retraction Watch to find out more about these case histories and all these issues like plagiarism, or conflict of interest, or even any other publication misconducts. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you about this conflict of interest and things like that. So now we'll try to deal with what are the different kinds of issues that actually lead to unethical behavior when it comes to publication. And when do these publication ethics get violated? So we'll try to discuss something on this topic. So what happens is that, whenever there is any kind of a publication misconduct or even a scientific misconduct, when this misconduct happens at the time of reporting the results or presenting research results in a conference, etc., that part of the whole thing is called a publication misconduct. And this misconduct again could be this FFP, which I talked about, or selective reporting, and authorship demands. See, authorship demands I have not yet discussed much, and which I will try to discuss in this talk. And then the referring process. See, as I said, reviewers also can have certain ethical issues, and there could be unethical reviewing which can take place. And there's something called reciprocal reviewing. What is reciprocal reviewing? In this case, what happens is that the referee happens to be probably a friend of the author whose manuscript has been submitted. So there is a covert agreement between the two people saying that, look, you take care of my manuscripts, and the other guy says that I will take care of your manuscripts. So it's like saying that you scratch my back, I will scratch your back. So this is what is called reciprocal review. Then there could be something called editorial bias. See, this is something which many people, especially from third world countries, they actually face, unfortunately. Editorial bias can result from regionalism or misunderstanding of cultural backgrounds. And very often people say that manuscripts from third world countries do not get easily accepted because of some bias which editors of Western journals have, and things like that. Then this could be conflict of interest, which I have just now discussed prior to this and in the last lecture. Then misleading data, okay, data misinterpretation, which I discussed earlier. Credits. Credits I have not yet discussed. I'll try to tell you more about it. And then ethical clearances. I had discussed about ethical committees which are present in all organizations which especially deal with biomedical research and medical research. They need to have ethical committees. And before any work can be taken up involving any live beings, there could be animals, there could be human beings also. Proper ethical clearances need to be taken, approvals need to be taken from the ethical committees. So when that doesn't happen, then again, it's a misconduct. So if you do some devious means of getting these ethical clearances, then that's a misconduct. Then you can also have personal bias, which can creep in by anyone. It could be the reviewer, it could be the editor, it could be publishing house, and many such and many more such issues can happen. So one could see that in all these cases, actually, these kind of misconducts can actually be prevented quite easily if only some proper code of conduct or very specific guidelines are adopted not only in the research laboratory, but also by the editors and the reviewers themselves. Okay, so what could be the results of these publication misconducts? The first and foremost is that the whole research community will get affected. And once this happens, this can cause a loss of trust in journals and research itself. People may stop believing papers published by journals. It can also cause a lot of damage to the careers of people involved. Okay. If it's case of authors, the corresponding author himself may get affected quite a bit. And along with him, his collaborators in that paper, even though they had no inkling about possible publication misconduct, they also would get affected. Their careers would also get affected. And there could be also students in that process who get affected. Then the institution's reputation can also be affected and damaged in this process. And then the whole set of results, which are now the wrong results, which are now contributed to or published in form of a paper, they all add up and then get included in the research result base, which is also called the evidence base. And when such results get included in the evidence base, that naturally will get corrupted like a virus in a computer. And overall, everybody's time and efforts are wasted, and money is also wasted. Not only the author who might have used unethical means or whatever, then the journals who took so much time in accepting the paper for review, the reviewers' time, all that, it costs money. It costs any professional time which is spent also costs money. So it's a waste of everything. Then when it comes to biomedical research and medical research, and again, this kind of unethical research, as I said, can directly harm the participants. Even if it is published, if an unethical research work gets published and someone takes up that particular published work and then tries to apply it to a new set of subjects, there the subjects can also get harmed. Then finally, of course, you see whenever you publish papers, what are also called novel results, etc., what could be termed as novel results. These results indirectly actually direct the scientific policy of the governments also, and the practices which are to be followed, etc. So once, if it is found that there's a misconduct which has occurred in the publication, then all that efforts which have been put into the direction of the scientific policy, they will also go waste. And again, future research also will be getting misdirected, as well as the funding gets wasted. So these are typical results of publication misconduct which can happen. And now, who are the people who actually commit these misconducts? First and foremost, it comes from the authors and researchers themselves. Now, again, what kind of publication misconduct which authors can do? Okay, first, of course, you have the base of an unethical research practice, FFP, etc. Image manipulation. See, I had shown probably in one of my earlier lectures some images which have been doctored. Okay. And so this image manipulation is also done very often by people in the case of biomedical research and biological research. Take the case of, for example, something called Western blots. Those who are in biological sciences, they know what are Western blots. Okay. And so what are these Western blots? It's a scientific procedure to separate out proteins from blood and tissue, and then it comes out in the form of some images which are presented. And for some unethical scientific reason, you want to project some wrong blots or whatever. So that can be done. So you can manipulate images in this case. And plagiarism, I have already talked about. Selective reporting, I have talked about. Redundant publications, salami publications. Inappropriate authorship. This I will be talking about gift and ghost authorship, what it means. I'll be talking about very soon. Undeclared conflicts of interest, I have already talked about. Manipulated referee addresses. This is something absolutely horrendous, and even till very recently, a couple of years ago, I never had an idea about what this manipulated referee addresses means. I will definitely tell you very soon about this, and it's a very, very bad practice. Then editors. See, editors also have a large role, and there is a distinct possibility that sometimes editors can also commit certain publication misconducts. Now, how do editors get into this problem? Okay, see, editors sometimes they can have biases. As I said, very often people in third world countries believe that whenever they submit manuscripts to some of these top journals, I can tell you in the case of, say, physics journals, there happens to be one very important journal called Physical Review B, which is in condensed matter research. And similarly, they have other physical review A, B, C, D, E in different areas of physics research. And it has been generally found that it is extremely difficult for an author from a third world byline get through the editorial screening process itself, before which it can actually be sent to the referees. Typically, in 1 or 2 days, you find that most of the manuscripts are returned by the editors. And somehow or the other, it happens that there's a general feeling that this happens more for people coming from third world countries, whereas the same person, if he were to send a manuscript from, say, a Western byline, probably he doesn't face this kind of a discrimination. See, this is all, of course, experiences of people. Nothing is black and white, but this is what in general people feel. So there could be biases in selection of manuscripts by editors who decide whether a particular manuscript should go ahead with the referring process, or it should be rejected at that point itself and sent back to the author saying that this particular manuscript is not probably fit for that particular journal. So people feel that, especially from third world countries, that they are being given stepmotherly treatment by Western journal editors. Then again, these editors may also have certain preferential treatment for friends. See, again, I said that most of these editors, they are all scientists themselves. At some point of the time or the other, these people have been active scientific researchers. Some of them do continue their scientific research work in spite of being editors. So, suppose you find that you get a paper from a person who happens to be known, very well known to you, and he happens to be a friend or a colleague at your earlier institution. So then you would probably give it a different look as compared to other manuscripts from other people. So this is what is called a preferential treatment for friends and colleagues from the same university or institution or research institution. Then you have what is called confidentiality. See, whenever a manuscript lands up on the desk of an editor, till the time that it comes out in print, the whole process has to be kept fully confidential. No one's supposed to know who the referees are. No one's supposed to know except the editor and the authors, the comments of the referees. And all the process is supposed to be confidential. But again, here, if an editor breaches that confidentiality, it's an unethical practice. And finally, there could be intentional delays for rival publications. See, what happens is that editors, as I said, they are scientists themselves. They can also be referees for other publications from other journals, okay? Manuscript from other journals, which could be sent to this person in light of his scientific standing. But then the editor may feel that, look, if I accept or review this particular paper quickly, and if it happens to be a very interesting paper or a path-breaking paper, then the other journal will get a credit as compared to his own journal. So then he may try to somehow intentionally delay the referring process for that particular manuscript. So this is one example of what could be, this intentional delay. So this is how editors can also commit publication misconduct. Then we get the reviewers. So what do reviewers do? I had shown you some examples where certain papers, manuscripts, which were sent for review to some particular person, they never bothered to reply and give their comments, whereas they themselves took that result, plagiarized it, and published it in some other journal as their own work and their own paper. So there could be plagiarism, indulgence by reviewers, plagiarism of ideas, texts, or data. And they can also have, these undisclosed conflicts of interest. Okay. And the temptation, is quite strong sometimes. Okay. And temptation to plagiarize, then temptation not to disclose a conflict of interest. See, for example, there's a paper which is sent to a referee, and if it happens to come from, say, a collaborator in his own institution, he should not take up that paper. Or if it so happens that it comes from a rival group scientifically, then also he should not, in principle, if he's an honest referee, he should not be taking up that paper for referring. Okay. And so there are certain, a referee is expected to behave in a certain way and expected to have certain degree of scientific integrity. Then confidentiality again. So referee is never supposed to divulge to anyone that he is actually in the process of reviewing a particular manuscript from some authors. Again, sometimes it so happens that the reviewers may in fact contact the authors themselves directly. It happens to be a friend or something like that, or whatever reasons, referee may directly contact the author, which is absolutely wrong. And again, intentional delays. This is a very common issue where you find that you have sent a paper for publication in the journal sends it to a referee, and you find that the referee is sitting on your paper for ages. Of course, nowadays, this problem is much less than earlier because the journals firmly insist on a deadline before which the reviewer must return his comments on the paper. But then it used to happen quite sometimes. I mean, in earlier days, this was a very common problem. And again, I can tell you that many people from third world countries, especially India, they used to find their manuscripts getting inordinately delayed in the referring process. And sometimes some of them, it so happened that the same results would suddenly appear in some other journal, very similar to the manuscript which has been sent for referring. So this misconducts can also occur on part of the reviewers. Then, of course, we have the publishers. The publishers are owners of the journals. They also can, in a way, sometimes this doesn't happen so easily. It happens very, very rarely that publishers can also commit certain misconducts. Especially if they find that, look, a publication or a non-publication of a particular article will help, then they may take some unethical approach to action on that particular paper. And again, the same thing like undeclared conflicts of interest, confidentiality, and same things apply for publishers also. And even the funding agencies sometimes, they also are in this process of misconduct. This, of course, usually does not happen, at least in India, because most of the funding agencies in India are from the government. But it's not so in the Western world, where you have many private funding agencies. So when you have private funding agencies, there's a whole scenario is different. Okay. So in fact, sometimes these funding agencies, when they fund a particular research work there, they may even own that research work. So in fact, the scientist may be actually indirectly indebted to or bound by certain contracts to the funding agency, that he has to hand over all the results to the funding agency. And as I said earlier in one of my lectures, that everyone wants good data. Nobody wants negative data or bad data. So in case the research comes up with certain negative results, the funding agency may be interested in stopping those negative results or suppressing those inconvenient results. And they can also try to delay publications, and they may not give authors enough access to the data, and biasing the presentations of findings, which I showed you how negative results can be changed and positive results can be amplified. And again, conflict of interest without properly disclosing their role in the whole process, that's also very unethical. So that's how all these people can actually end up committing publication misconduct. Okay, now I'll tell you this case of very interesting case of what is meant by manipulated peer reviews. Let me tell you in the beginning that it's an absolutely horrible way of misconduct. This was a case history, and one co-editor writes, recently I received a manuscript submitted for publication. You see, this has relevance to, I think someone in the earlier lecture raised a question that that if you suggest referees in a paper, in a manuscript, whether the editors or the journal will send the manuscript, or whether the journal is bound to send the manuscript to that suggested referees. I think someone asked this question in one of the earlier lectures. So, see, what happens is that you should need to look at this in the light of how the publishing of articles happens these days. See, typically any major popular journal like Physical Review or Nature or any of those very big journals, they publish anything between say 5,000 to 6,000 papers per year. And when they publish that kind of numbers, every year. Now imagine how many manuscripts actually land up in those journal houses. So that could be easily some 4 to 5 times these numbers of actual manuscripts which land up, which of course most of them get rejected. So what this will translate to is typically there could be at least 100 to 200 manuscripts landing up at the editor's desk every day. Now, when this many manuscripts happen to land up at an editor's desk, now what is the editor's job? Firstly, of course, he has to screen the manuscripts and decide whether they are fit for further refereeing process or not. And then after screening those manuscripts and shortlisting the number of manuscripts which are appropriate for the next step, that is refereeing, he has to find the referees for those papers. And each paper typically needs at least 2 referees. And you expect that these 2 referees to be unbiased in their views and unbiased in their approach and are fully ethical in their approach. So all this is in the middle. So now it is a tremendous work for editors and so what can the editor do? So what the editor does is he will simply request the authors to give some suggestions for referees for their papers. Of course, it is the editor's prerogative whether to accept the names of those referees which the author has suggested, or he can simply reject all those names and send it to someone else he wants. He may choose. So now what happened in this particular case is that, so likewise, generally journals ask for suggested referees. So this person received a manuscript which has been submitted for publication. And the author of the manuscript recommended 2 reviewers along with their Gmail addresses. See, there's another issue here. Long ago, years ago, before all this emails, etc., and internet took over, manuscripts used to be sent to journals by post. It takes about, say, 15 days to 1 month. And then the journal, after deciding that it has to be reviewed, used to send the manuscript again by post to referees, the chosen referees, directly to their addresses. So the chance of a problem happening in this process was less. And what was this problem? Nowadays, that is not done at all. Everything is done on email or on the internet. So you submit a manuscript, the manuscript is loaded up on their journal website, their publication process websites, and they may send the soft copy to the chosen referees, or they may invite the referees to go online and then referee the manuscripts. So it's all electronic now. So this author gave 2 names of 2 reviewers along with their Gmail accounts and certain addresses. Then somehow that editor or the co-editor had some suspicion, and he was curious about that affiliation of one of the reviewers. So what he did was he tried to look up again on the internet the name of that reviewer, and then what he found was that the email address of that, say, reviewer 1 was quite different from what the author has submitted. Okay. So then what he did was he used that email which he found on the internet under that particular name of reviewer 1, and he used that to contact the reviewer. And for the second author recommended reviewer, the reviewer 2, he also looked up on the internet and found that there was a different email address. And then, of course, he used that email address which he found on the internet, and then he communicated to the reviewer that please referee this paper. instead of sending it to the Gmail addresses which were sent by the author. So immediately the reviewer one responded with a very interesting comment that the title of that manuscript looked very similar to a manuscript review that he had been asked to confirm for another journal, say Journal 1. And that particular reviewer asked this editor to contact the editor of that journal where it was accepted already. And upon contacting the editor of that Journal 1 or whatever, this co-editor discovered that the author actually had provided bogus email addresses for the recommended reviewers. So you'll see what has happened here. The author gave the names of some genuine persons, scientific people, scientists, but then the email addresses which he provided were not belonging to those people. So whose were those email addresses? Let's see. So the editor of that first journal where the manuscript was accepted, he became suspicious of the reviews when he received a review within 1 hour of the request to review manuscript. See, what happens is that when an editor sends, I also review a lot of manuscripts. So an editor sends me a manuscript for reviewing, and in case I accept that this paper, I accept that I will referee that paper, then I'll take at least some 1 week to 10 days or maybe even more to referee that paper. I'm not going to do it immediately, sit down and do it in a matter of few minutes and send back my comments. It never happens usually. But here he found that the editor found that he got a reply within a few hours of sending the invitation. And then he also discovered that the email addresses provided were all bogus. And again, the second reviewer, the reviewer 2, actually declined the co-editor's request to review the manuscript. So now what the co-editor did was, just to prove that the email address provided was bogus, he sends that invitation for review to that bogus email account. And he's shocked to learn that within a few hours, he receives a very positive reply saying that everything is fine, the paper should be accepted. And then what happens then, he calls up that particular reviewer number 2 and asks him, did you send any comment within a few hours? Of course, he had not sent the comments. So what has happened here is that the author provides email addresses of himself to the journal under the garb of saying that okay, these addresses belong to some scientists who are somewhere else. And then if the journal by chance happens to accept those email addresses and then sends the manuscript for referring, assuming that they are sending it to reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, they all actually end up on the computer of the author himself. And the author himself will write a review of his own paper and send back the comments. So they can see how bad and how horrendous, appalling this kind of a behavior is. Okay. So the Cope agreed that this case was brought about by basically it's a failure of the journal processes, okay, and the peer review system. And so it's always a good practice to check the names and addresses and email contacts of reviewers. So because of this happening, now journals have taken very strong action and they have improved their processes. And so now a lot of care is taken and cross checks are done before deciding on who the referees are. So the good practice is always to check all these things, and especially when the names are recommended by authors. And again, editors should never use, the reviewers which are preferred by the author. Naturally, author will give his own friends' names or people whom he feels will accept his work. So again, as I said, finding reviewers can be a very difficult process. And simple checks, like what has been done, should be possible, and it should be possible to avoid this kind of issues coming up. And also, of course, the publisher should take some responsibility in this whole thing, but it is their duty to support their editors also. And so when the author is trying to defraud the whole system, the journal should try and contact the author or possibly the author's institution and then inform them that such a misconduct has happened. And sometimes this can be criminal also, because the author is actually impersonating someone else. Okay. And then, of course, the authors should be also warned that if there's no response received within some time, then even the earlier papers published by the same authors will be retracted from the journal. Okay. And of course, another way is to simply send this article to some other reviewer, or in case the article is published, get it re-reviewed by some other neutral referees, and then decide whether it has to be retracted or it should remain in the journal as a published article. Then there was another case history too, where the manuscript was flagged to that editor as having received reviewer reports indicating very, very high interest. See, again, you see, a referee has to be very balanced in his comments. Suppose someone gives inappropriately very, very high comments. See, this can happen very rarely, not often. So if all the time, if you find that some referees are giving very high grading and very, very positive comments all through from top to bottom, there is cause for suspicion. So there was a manuscript where the reports indicated very high interest, and then what happened was already there were 2 or 3 rounds of refereeing, and all the 3 reviewers were advising that the manuscript should be accepted without any further revision. Now then, the editor had some suspicion that the referees are behaving oddly. And then he checked the credentials of all these 3 reviewers. And actually, he was aghast to find that none of these reviewers were having any publications themselves. And all these 3 reviewers were actually found to have been suggested by the authors. And the institutions which were given for the suggested authors, but the email addresses were all with private webmail services. And the reviewers were actually found not to exist at all. So one of the associate editors invited the author-suggested reviewers and 2 of their own choosing, neither of whom replied to the invitation. So after it was determined that the reviewer suggestions were all fake, even the previous publication by the same authors with the same fake reviewers were all identified, and then of course they were also retracted. So all the authors were contacted to ask if they could supply more details on the suggested reviewer names, but they did not respond. And then the editors even tried to contact the institution to which the authors belong, but then they found it very difficult to contact anybody. And finally, they found one name, and they found that that name was one of the authors in the paper itself. So what else can you now do? So then Cope simply decided that the editors decided to reject the manuscript and then issue also retraction of the previous published article. So what was being done is that the author was creating false email accounts for suggested reviewers, which were going to totally unknown individuals, and the reviews were actually coming from the author himself. And so now that particular author has been banned for publishing anymore in that journal. Okay, and so they asked whether Cope has any additional advice. They said that yes, this is a very, very serious form of publication misconduct, and this could be also criminal because the author was actually impersonating the reviewers. So what happened was that it was seen that the author has published papers in many other journals, and then there were plans to write to those editors of those other journals also to check the reviewers and start the whole process and check whether any misconduct was done. And if yes, of course, they will be retracted. So, what are all the causes for this misconduct? Okay. When it comes to medical research and biomedical research, the applications for ethics committee approvals, they are not properly given. Okay, they are because you see the problem is something like this. Suppose you want to get an ethics committee approval to experiment on say 50, take say for example rats. Now you put an application that you want to work on 50 rats, but in reality you want to work on say 500 rats. Okay, so that's not correct, and that's you're extending or extrapolating the ethics committee approval. Even if you get an approval for 50 rats, you can never, think of working on 500 rats. Okay. And if it's human beings, it's all the more serious. And sometimes you finish your research work on the living being, but then apply for ethics committee approval later, and then try somehow backdate your forms, etc., and then get approvals. That also an unethical way. Then again, negative results you try to ignore, okay, or hide, so that your positivity of your publication goes up along with that. Impact also goes up. And sometimes you leave it to your junior researchers or sometimes even research students to carry out, the research, and you may even sometimes offload the researcher. The faculty may offload his teaching duties to students sometimes. And then another problem is demanding authorship from the students' work or mentees' work. See, authorship is something which I will discuss, maybe if not in this class, the next class, where authorship, there are certain rules to become an author. Okay. So if you do not satisfy those rules, you cannot become an author. In such a situation, if you demand an authorship, it is unethical. Okay. And there's also expectation from certain people that that their name must appear in all the papers which are coming out from that particular laboratory, whether or not they are involved in that research or not. This also you can find very often happening in our country also. And similarly, there are other such issues which are not going into. So these are various causes for this publication misconduct. Okay. And you can also, like I said, delay reviewer decisions, okay, to make sure that if you happen to be a referee and in the same line of research work, you are doing exactly similar work or something like that. So you sit on the papers which come to you for refereeing and then push your own research work and try to publish it before you finish reviewing this article. That's also very unethical. And as I said, agreement between the people to become friendly reviewers. So this is the case of I scratch your back and you scratch my back. Okay. And then again, authors purposely identifying themselves within a manuscript. What do you mean by this? See, most of the publication process, when you send a manuscript, usually, most of the journals adopt what is called a single blind approach. What do you mean by single blind approach? Names of the authors and the manuscript are known to the person who is referring that manuscript. But the name of the referee or the reviewer is not known to the author. So this is called a single blind approach. You also have what is called a double blind approach, where both authors won't know who are the referees, the referees or the reviewers won't know who are the authors. So that is called a double blind approach. So this is just to ensure fairness. So in a double-blind system, if the author writes that, say, in the text of the manuscript, our previous study has shown and gives a reference, that means he is identifying himself in the course of this paper. So that is actually you're breaching the confidentiality and you're letting your name known to the referee. So you're destroying this double-blind process. So that also is a misconduct, termed as a misconduct whenever a double-blind approach is adopted by the journal. Then, as I said, there are so many reasons which I have already gone into: social pressure, greed, plain greed, ego, and very bad monitoring and self-justification. That is, my work is better than others, and whatever I'm doing is fine. Then slippery slope effect. What is slippery slope effect? See, once you start indulging in misconduct, you cannot stop. You'll go on doing that forever. And pressure of time and all this thing. But generally, it was noticed by a certain study that whenever people who are unbiased, okay, who are not yet doing any unethical practice, if they happen to get exposed to group members who, in fact, indulge in scientific misconduct, okay, they find that in general, this proximity to such people will draw in more such people and then increase this unethical behavior. And compared to this, in contrast, if employees or students and faculty are all the time reminded of ethical behavior, moral behavior, etc., and also all the time maintain positivity in their outlook, it was found that it actually decreases unethical conduct. And so what should be the various steps which the journal should take up? They should have very robust and well-described practices for all areas which have been prescribed by the Pope. And then journals must be transparent about their processes, okay? And, this is important because the authors also have a right to know how their manuscripts are being handled. So what are the different considerations which come into play when papers are submitted for, manuscripts are submitted for publication and things like that. So these policies must be very clear and transparent, and also requirements for authorship and contributorship. These also policies determining these authorships and contributorship, they should also be very clear. I'll try to explain this authorship issues probably in my next lecture. And the peer review process, referee process. And so this also must be very transparent so that the author knows that, look, at this point of time, my paper is lying with the referee and this much time is being taken by the referee. He may not know who the referee is, but at least he knows how long the paper is lying with the referee, okay? So the whole process must be, at least this part of the process must be made known to the author and everyone else, okay? It should be transparent. And then whenever, there are some allegations that the journal has published something wrong, etc., they must have a certain protocol and processes which can respond to this kind of allegation and then review this misconduct and try to see whether has it occurred before publication or it has occurred after publication. And then they should also very clearly define what are conflicts of interest and how they should be disclosed by editors, authors, and reviewers. And then requirement of data availability. See, these days now, whenever you publish your paper results, data also is requested by the journals. If you're not able to provide data to the journal, they at least ask you to give an undertaking that if and when journal requires the data to be shown, that you are willing to show your data to the journal. Okay, and this is very important, especially in the case of medical research, and sometimes even in other areas of research also. And again, the journals must provide very clear guidelines on ethical conduct. Okay. And they should also publish very clearly what are the copyright and publishing licenses. And then also very clearly say what are the author fees and reader fees. I'll try to explain later on this author fees and reader fees. And the transparency of the management process also is required. What is the business model of the journal? See, all journals, they are a business in publishing. So what are their business model? What are the processes, the policies and softwares, etc.? They should be all transparent about it. Okay. And also the post-publication debate on comments, etc., retractions, corrections. Okay. That policy also must be put in place by the journal. And what is the process for handling complaints against the journal? See, the author may have a certain complaint of bias against an editor, saying that your outlook is biased and my manuscript is getting a very bad treatment because of the editor, etc. It's a complaint. So the journal and the publisher must have a very clear policy on how to handle these complaints. Okay. So well, I think I will try to stop at this point because I think I have run out of time already. So the misconduct steps for journals I have already described. And in the next class, I'll try to talk about violation of publication ethics and go on with what are authorship issues with the publications. Okay, that's all for today. And so please let me know if you have any comments quickly. Any comments, please? Any comments? I don't think I see any comments in the chat box. Does anyone have any comments on the lecture? Okay, so there don't seem to be any comments. So we'll continue in the next lecture. Thank you.